or emphasising the negative and perhaps contributing to its severity.
The outlook has been murky. They're the images that brought shame. £13 billion of emergency loans.
It's been a charge thrown at the BBC since the collapse of Northern Rock in 2007. A collapse partly blamed by some on Robert Peston's reporting of the bank's troubles.
This bank is between a rock and a hard place.
There's certainly been a whole lot more bad news since then, with markets around the world plummeting, personal and government debt rising, and unemployment and inflation going up here too.
And heaven knows I'm miserable now.
But many Newswatch viewers consider the coverage of such stories to be unbalanced. A fortnight ago, we had a slew of emails about the way some new statistics had been reported, with Paul Savage writing, "I constantly find the BBC reporting on economic matters to be incredibly pessimistic. An example is today's report about the improvement in unemployment figures. Despite the good news, the BBC felt it necessary to travel to Hull to find a doom and gloom story to balance the good news. Andrew Dixon agreed, emailing, "I regret to say that I found the BBC One News at 10 p.m. totally skewed last night. The good news that about 500,000 new private sector jobs have been created against 140,000 public sector jobs lost didn't make the headlines and was buried about 20 minutes into the programme. While Lily Cummins observed, you quote that retail spending is down and interest rates are negative, but you just do not say anything at all about having the biggest jobless fall for a decade." With this week's strikes across Britain and riots in Athens, there's clearly no end to the bad economic news anytime soon. But should there be a refocusing of the BBC's coverage to ensure that a more positive message is put across? Well, the man who's been wrestling with that question and some others we'll explore for the past 3.5 years is Jeremy Hillman. He's leaving the BBC in a couple of weeks, but we've grabbed him for a word before he goes. Jeremy Hillman, it's maybe a coincidence, but the world economic crisis seemed to break just as you were taking over this job as head of the business and economics unit. Are you personally responsible, even a little bit?
Yeah, I sometimes get called the Grim Reaper around the office. I'm not sure if it was a stroke of good luck or bad luck in terms of my career, but certainly it's been a tumultuous period. There's no doubt that the adrenaline pumps when you're chasing a big story as a journalist. I think it's absolutely a challenge to make sure you get the right tone, the right balance. You know, I look back on the last 2 or 3 years, and I like to feel we've done broadly a good job.
But running Greek crisis to apocalyptic, the end of the euro, the end of civilization as we know it, and it probably won't be that bad in the end, will it?
Well, I think, apocalyptic is, I'd like to challenge and look at what in our reporting, was apocalyptic. We saw the governor of the Bank of Greece this week, warn that not passing the austerity measures would be a suicide measure. That was the language coming from the governor of the Bank of Greece. So I think we've been very measured in our tone and coverage of Greece, which has been a huge story. The whole sovereign debt crises that have enveloped not just Greece but Ireland and wider afield have been a very significant story.
Back to our earlier question about the reporting of the jobless figures, relatively good news about employment in the country, and it goes down, not in the headlines, deep down into the bulletin, and people get the impression is that, again, it's journalists only like bad news, not good news.
Well, look, Hugh Pym was our lead correspondent that day on these unemployment figures. It was the middle of this month. It was the most prominent business story throughout the day. It was on every single bulletin, every single major piece of broadcasting we did on radio, television and online, the front page of our online. You're talking about the order on one bulletin, the 10 o'clock news, which I'm not directly responsible for, but ironically on that day the lead story was the Northern Rock going back into private hands, arguably another very good news story.
We still get regular emails about the, shall we call it, the idiosyncrasies of delivery of your business editor, Robert Peston. Is there anything you can do about it? Does it matter?
Look, Robert is the first to admit, and if he was sitting here, that he would tell you he has an idiosyncratic style. He is a quirky broadcaster, not your classic broadcaster.
There irritates a lot of viewers and listeners.
Well, it may do, but actually, what we hear, and certainly the response that he gets, is a huge recognition of the substance of what he reports rather than the way in which he reports it.
Viewer R.J. Mattila, however, says, "I'm increasingly annoyed at the cult of personality which your senior journalists appear to wish to create around themselves. We're constantly told of things like, according to Robert Peston, and seems to be an awful lot of mention about the scoops or who first broke the story.
Each of our reporters has, you know, I think rightly and very understandably, a public profile. They are prominent individuals who have a fantastic reputation in the fields in which they cover. I don't sense over the last year or two that that's a trend that I've seen getting worse, if you like. I think it's absolutely right. They have a profile. And I think it's right that we do sell and we trumpet our great journalism when we do it. You know, it's right to, if the BBC has done a good piece of work, that we draw our listeners' and viewers' attention to that.
A well-known predecessor of Mr. Peston in the job, Peter Jay, when he was at the Times, once famously said that he wrote his stories for three people: the editor of the Times, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and the Governor of the Bank of England. Has business coverage moved on a bit since then?
Well, I mean, I'd really like to hope it has, and I think it absolutely has. I think we've pushed the envelope in terms of some of the terminology we've been able to use.